So you started as the DoD's first Director of Emerging Capabilities Policy just over a month ago. So I wanted to start off with, what is Emerging Capabilities Policy?
Great question. I feel like on the outside, if you ask people what emerging capabilities are to begin with, you'll get all sorts of different answers. But from a department perspective, the Emerging Capabilities Policy Office is designed to lead OSD Policy's efforts on capability policy and strategy development, emerging technology diplomacy, related interagency initiatives. You know, what we've been able to say about the National Defense Strategy so far discusses the way that the development and fielding of emerging capabilities, whether one's thinking about AI, hypersonics, directed energy, quantum, all sorts of different technology areas are critical to the enduring advantage that the United States seeks to have over potential adversaries. And so our goal is to advance U.S. defense and security interests by more effectively integrating emerging capabilities across the waterfront. And by that, what I mean is, you know, DoD, as everyone knows, is a pretty big place, right? It's like the world's biggest office building, and part of what we're designed to do is to help bridge between some different parts of the department, and it's specifically within OSD policy, focusing on making sure that emerging capabilities are reflected as a high priority in our strategy, in our planning documents, in our budgets, et cetera. That's the start. You know, easy job.
So can you talk a little bit more about where you sit organizationally and how that helps you and your team do your job?
Absolutely. So I report to ASD, Assistant Secretary of Defense, Dr. Mara Karlin. And the placement of the Emerging Capabilities Policy Office there was deliberate. Since when we think about the role that emerging technologies are likely to play in the future of warfare, and emerging technologies in this way, you know, can refer to things that they're actually pretty close to being fielded or being experimented with or prototyped now, that these are things that could be central to the future force. You know, that they're not science projects that in 20, 30 years we hope will pay off. I mean, DoD works on those too, and those are truly important. But our office specifically was placed within the strategy, plans, and capabilities arena within OSD policy to try to more directly integrate insights about emerging capabilities into our strategy, into our planning documents, into our budgets, with the idea here meaning both thinking about emerging technologies as well as thinking about new concepts or plans to incorporate existing technologies that might be close to ready or even ready to be fielded right now.
And before you go back to academia, what do you think are your top 3 priorities that you would like to accomplish?
I'm definitely going back to academia. I just want to be clear. I think, like, I'm here because of the central challenge identified by the National Defense Strategy. You know, that central challenge is the urgent need to sustain and strengthen the American military to deter aggression, specifically as it involves the pacing threat, China, and the acute threat that the department faces being Russia, and integrating emerging capabilities into the core of how the U.S. military does business, I think is essential to innovation. The phrase I like to use is that the U.S. needs to act with responsible speed. You know, everybody wants us to go faster, right? Everybody wants the Department of Defense to be faster in developing, experimenting, and integrating emerging capabilities. And that's right. And the top priority of our office, as I just talked about, is ensuring that emerging capabilities are more clearly, more effectively integrated into what the department does and policy's role in strategy and plans and in budgets. But the responsibility part of that is really important, as you know from your time in government, and the need for AI initiatives, in particular, to be responsible, the need for sufficient safety and testing of systems. That even as we seek to move faster, we need to do that responsibly, and I think the U.S. can and should do that responsibly, and so our office is designed to be a voice within the policy component of DoD, working to advance those priorities. We think that emerging capabilities can play a critical role in promoting the pillars of the National Defense Strategy: integrated deterrence, an enduring advantage, and campaigning. And this has to include thinking about issues surrounding the ethical questions, strategic stability questions associated with emerging technologies, because doing that reflects our norms, reflects our values. It will make us stronger. We just can't let that stop us from being faster. So I think that's what everybody agrees that DoD needs to do. And then the last thing I'll say from a priority perspective is the role of emerging capability diplomacy. The U.S. increasingly wants to work with allies and partners. We normally think about that work in terms of transferring completed technology, but emerging technology diplomacy has become an increasingly relevant part of what DoD does. Whether working with other emerging, with other democracies to try to sustain efforts for Western technological edge, or just generally thinking about how to cooperatively develop, manufacture, and deploy high-impact emerging capabilities. So the last priority of my office that I'll mention for now, I could spend all day talking about it, would be, I do, I guess, every day, but is building those collaborative, diplomatic relationships, working with other components of DoD to engage with U.S. allies and partners on these efforts.
Great, thank you. So a big theme of Nexus today is trust, trust in autonomous applications in defense. Can you talk about what policies and processes exist today within the department to assure trust?
Absolutely. And frankly, from your prior role, you may know some of these better than I do. But the department has a number of different, I think the more that people know about DoD's systems for ensuring the safe, responsible deployment of weapon systems in particular, the more reassured that they would actually be. There's a myriad number of different legal and other sorts of checks that every weapon system has to go through before it is approved. And there are a number of different checks even for things that are not weapon systems. Think about responsible AI initiatives. Think about the AI ethical principles that guide the department. These truly are priorities and help ensure that whatever we do as a department in these sort of emerging capability spaces is done responsibly. And I'm focusing on AI in part because that's obviously an area where there's been a lot of attention, and where the different parts of DoD really need to work together. And I think another sort of symbol, let me give you two other examples, I think, of the department's commitment to trust, essentially in this context. The first is the way that our R&E Undersecretary Heidi Shyu made trusted autonomy, in particular, called that out specifically as a phrase, as one of the key technology priorities for the Department of Defense. And that, I think, is really important in suggesting that it's not just, again, the systems in and of itself. It's not just about going fast. It's about going fast in a responsible manner. The second is, I think, the internal transformation that's happening in DoD right now with the standing up of the CDAO, the Chief Digital and AI Office. And that, that office has been, publicly announced before, brings together the Defense Digital Service, the JAIC, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, and the Chief Data Officer. And that, I think, almost more than anything else, really symbolizes the strong role that DoD envisions sort of trust, ethics, et cetera, having in emerging capabilities, and specifically in AI and data in particular. But even moving beyond, AI, even moving beyond autonomy, and we haven't, and we can talk about autonomous weapon systems if you, if you want in DoD policy. I'm staying away for now, since I feel like that will come at some point. But even moving beyond something like that, if you look at policies that DoD has regarding directed energy, the conversations that happen about hypersonics, there's no military in the world that I think takes its commitment to these issues more seriously than the United States. And you see that with this incredible array of reviews that the US has to make sure that its weapon systems, its other systems, comply with international humanitarian law, can be deployed safely and responsibly, et cetera.
Thank you. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the AI strategy. So the last AI strategy was published as an annex of the 2018 National Defense Strategy. With this new 2022 NDS, does the department plan to publish another AI strategy?
I think that there have been a number of public reports. Most recently, I think there was a GAO study that came out suggesting that DoD is going to be re-looking its AI strategy in one way or another. I mean, that's really squarely in the wheelhouse of this new CDAO, the sort of successor organization to the JAIC, and I think they will be leading departmental efforts on AI strategy. And I think this is an example of where the bringing together of data and AI in the new CDAO is so powerful. Since if data is the fuel that makes AI go, essentially, what is an algorithm without the data that you would use to train it in one way or another, then the bringing those together under the CDAO construct, I think, will be reflected in what a new strategy will likely look like as well. And I think the urgent focus, if you look at what's been published over the last year by the department about the CDAO, is the need to focus on speeding adoption. Not just a sort of pie in the sky strategy for AI or data. I mean, I think the last strategy, frankly, was DoD's first strategy in this area, and it was very successful. What's necessary now is to turn those thoughts into reality and to do it faster. And in my office and many others in the department are working hard to support the CDAO in many of those efforts. And I think that's illustrates the way that the department is trying to not just sort of talk the talk, but walk the walk when it comes to AI now.
Thanks. So my last question for you before I take the audience Q&A is on DoD Directive 3009, the policy on autonomous weapon systems, which is my favorite topic. So many criticize that this policy, which is 10 years old, is outdated because it doesn't mention AI. And for autonomous weapon systems, there has been a lot of advancement in the last decade that actually power autonomy for these weapon systems. Can you address that criticism? Do you think the policy should be refreshed?
All right, how much time we got? I think 3000.09 is a remarkable document in many ways. It's an internal Defense Department directive that was signed out by the Deputy Secretary of Defense in 2012 and was, in many ways, the world's first policy statement on autonomous weapon systems. There have been these ongoing international discussions in Geneva for a decade plus on autonomous weapon systems in one way or another. And one of the remarkable things, I think, is the way that the United States has been a leader in outlining how seriously it takes the issue of autonomous weapon systems and the additional reviews that it thinks that autonomous weapon systems would require, both before formal development and before fielding. But the passage of time, though, makes all documents look imperfect. And I suspect looking at 3000.09 today, certainly, that was written before the DoD. That was written before the JAIC existed. That was written before the CDAO existed. That was written before DoD had ethical principles. That was written before the publication of DIU's attempt to interpret those from an implementation perspective. That was written before DoD's responsible AI initiatives. So there's a lot that wasn't in that document. And to be fair, there's a lot that shouldn't be in that document, since AI and autonomy, I don't need to tell this audience, are not the same thing. Even if, from a national security and defense perspective, they're often conflated, and there's certainly in the Venn diagram there's overlap. But I think that the department is committed to taking seriously being responsible about autonomous weapon systems and having guidance concerning them that incorporates all that has happened over the last decade. And my hope is that anything the department does would reflect that need for responsible speed when it comes to the adoption of these kinds of systems. But the passage of time means that I think certainly there are conversations that are ongoing about the directive, and for those that are not extremely well versed, way too versed, don't even want to think about it, in DoD, in the DoD bureaucracy, directives are required to have a sort of relook every 10 years. So this is actually an opportune time for the department, now that, given all that's happened over the last decade in the AI space, to take a look at that directive and figure out, what should be done to reflect sort of where we are now compared to where we were a decade ago.
So with the directive, the review process that is required by the directive has never been triggered by any DoD weapon systems. So putting aside the fact that the practice or the policy has not actually gone into practice, what are some good things that the policy has done for the department in the last 10 years?
I think the policy really highlighted for the department the way that if you wanted to develop or deploy an autonomous weapon system, that there were additional checks that were necessary, and checks that involved stakeholders from across the department, not just policy, not just what was then AT&L, but now is sort of R&E and A&S, not just this undersecretary or that undersecretary or sort of the military services, but that we wanted to bring together senior leaders of the department to review any potential autonomous weapon system. And that, I think, sent a good signal about how seriously DoD was taking its commitment to human control, commitment to human judgment, and its commitment to responsible behavior. And I think none of that has changed. And if anything, it's been reinforced. And I think the challenge over the next decade is figuring out how to sustain sort of that goodness, but also to speed the rate of adoption. And that's the big challenge, I think, for DoD when it comes to sort of AI and autonomous systems as a whole. And that certainly reflects, I think, any challenges that might exist concerning autonomous weapon systems themselves. But up to this point, I think that's the signal that's been sent.
Thank you. That's a perfect transition to my first audience question. So, Dr. Horowitz,
Oh, no.
Several of the speakers this morning have criticized DoD for moving too slowly on AI and autonomy. Can you give a specific example of how your office has or aims to have helped rectify that?
I've been there a month, guys. I'll be, on the outside, I certainly wrote things arguing that DoD needed to move faster, and in many cases, much faster, in thinking about the adoption of autonomous systems and AI. And I think what we're focused on doing as the department transitions from having a national defense strategy to thinking about the implementation of that strategy, and entering the FY24 budget cycle, all those sort of regularly scheduled checkpoints that the Department of Defense lives by. Ensuring that AI and autonomous systems are reflected not just in the sort of technical parts of the department, but within policy as well. So that those conversations that the strategy office is having, that the China office is having, that whatever office is having about what priorities should look like for the department, that those reflect emerging capabilities, including especially AI and autonomous systems. So I think I'm not sure there's something I could necessarily point to yet, but I think that's the idea, and I think you'll see that reflected in various departmental processes moving forward as our office works to speed and incorporate emerging capabilities within the broader department strategy. I think more clearly.
I actually want to dig a little deeper into that. When you were in academia, and you were, interviewing people or researching these topics, what are there specific policy areas or specific policies that people complained about the department having that served as the biggest barrier to adoption?
When I was an academic, nobody ever complained to me about anything. Not students in grades, not other faculty. Wait, sorry, what was the question again?
Were there policy areas that people complained about the most, or that you observed the most about the department being as barriers to adoption?
I think that one of the challenges that the department has faced is I would say twofold, and I think both of these are things that the department is working hard to address. I think the first is that multiple administrations, covering multiple political orientations, senior leaders have argued that the U.S. military needs to be faster and better when it comes to emerging technology adoption, and sometimes budgets haven't followed that. Sometimes they have, and I think one of the things that's really remarkable about this administration, and if you look particularly at some of what's come out of the Deputy Secretary's office, is a really strong commitment to, as I said before, DoD walking the walk. And I think that commitment makes me more confident than I've ever been, actually. Between that, the standing up of the CDAO, other things going on, that DoD can now actually move forward with speed in adopting AI and autonomous systems in a way that parts of DoD have wanted to for a long time, but there have been all of the normal bureaucratic challenges associated with doing so.
Thank you. Here's another audience question. You've mentioned emerging technology diplomacy as an important role for DoD. What countries are we cooperating with on emerging capabilities like autonomy and AI?
I think your old office, the JAIC was you tell me, was the U.S. has talked to a lot of its closest allies and partners about AI, and one thing I'd call out here is we have AUKUS now, a signature administration initiative focused on collaboration between the U.S., Australia, and the U.K. And the president, in White House statements, called out AI as an area for a cooperation between them. But the U.S. has had AI-related conversations with lots of its allies and partners. Both those sort of close kind of Five Eyes countries that you would imagine, as well as maybe some countries that might be a little bit surprising. So I think as the U.S. works to both build and sustain its enduring advantage, as the National Defense Strategy articulates, and reinforce integrated deterrence, that talking with allies and partners in a way that in some ways can be a two-way street, looking at advances that are happening in other countries, is both been a priority, as illustrated by the efforts of the JAIC, and will continue to be a priority. And so that's an area where our office is going to be focused in the coming year.
What do you think has been the impact of these cooperations on U.S. capabilities and planning?
I think the impact up to this point has been nascent. You've seen it in the form of exercises. You've seen it in the form of experimentation, and often things that are frankly below the headlines. As the department, I think, has really prepared itself for that push toward AI and autonomous system sort of adoption and integration that the CDAO is going to be championing. And if you look at some of the experimentation that's sort of happening out there now in the combatant commands, that this is really an area where I think growing partnerships are likely to play a role, and where maybe some of those diplomatic conversations, some of those research and development projects start turning into sort of joint or cooperative development prototypes, experiments in a way that sort of translates into the force. And I'd say again that I think that AUKUS is such a great example of this administration's really strong commitment to that two-way street in collaboration with allies and partners, and then specifically in some of these emerging capability areas.
And I think this probably will be my final question. Do you think we're giving the right level of emphasis to AI autonomy within the department in terms of funding, policy, sort of organizational structure of the Pentagon?
I'm actually pretty optimistic right now, which if you look at some of the things I've written over the last decade might strike one as a tiny bit curious. But I really have never seen an orientation of political leaders the way the department has now, that's so committed to thinking about emerging technologies and emerging capabilities. And the creation of our office, within the policy organization, the launch of the CDAO, the Deputy Secretary's creation of the Innovation Steering Group that R&E is running to try to coordinate and shepherd innovation across the department. I think all of those things make me optimistic that as we enter the sort of FY24 budget cycle, that we're going to start seeing that payoff as the department becomes it's not a question of just more, but smarter at thinking about AI and autonomous systems investments in a way that really pays off for the joint force.
And what about rest of government and Congress?
I mean, again, I've only been there a month. I think that Congress, I think this is actually an area where you have bipartisan support in many ways in Congress. If you look at the National Security AI Commission, for example, which had bipartisan support and whose recommendations have in many cases received bipartisan support. I mean, there are always debates between Congress and the department, other parts of the government about what exactly should happen at sort of this time or that time. But I think that I actually think that this is an area where there's been a bipartisan consensus in favor of the U.S. doing more, since AI leadership, of course, is not just a military question, but an economic question, a societal question, a broader workforce question as well. And that's something that this administration has been really committed to.
Well, thank you so much. It was great having you on our panel today.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.